Hey everyone, it's Dr. Scott. I have some notes about the chapter in Blakeslee and Fleischer about analyzing data, and we're not going to do a ton of we're not going to do a ton of things with that chapter because a lot of you have a lot of work between now and when you can actually start analyzing data. I don't think it'd be very helpful to give you some dummy data or some data from a previous project to work with. Everybody's going to have something different that they're working with. Some of you are thinking about mixed methods, and there's a lot of distance between now, if you decide to do the thesis option and conduct your study, there's a lot that has to happen between now and when you're actually analyzing your data. So I think the chapter is pretty good in giving you an overview of things to think about in analyzing data, but it's not something I think you need to stress about or think too much about right now. You'll think about it a ton later. But for right now, I just wanted to share some thoughts with you about that chapter. There's a mini assignment in here. Instead of having you guys write about the chapter or anything like that, there'll be a mini assignment in this video. So one thing that I wanted to mention was on page, it's on 175, and that the end of the paragraph that begins on 175, towards the end of that. They would argue, for example, that trying to make sense of your findings before you collect all of your data may make you more inclined to see some answers and not others, or may lead you to view your findings too narrowly. They're talking there about that very natural inclination, like if you're conducting survey research, to like peek in there and see, okay, what are people saying? I think it's okay to know what's coming in your research project. You're conducting interviews, obviously you're paying attention to what they're saying, and you're probably thinking a little bit about, gosh, I wonder how this connects with other interviews that I've conducted. I think some of that is natural. I do think, though, there is a tendency to shut down your interpretation really quickly, whether it's because you're working on a thesis project and you want to pivot to the writing portion of that because you want to finish the thing. I think that's natural. But it's not the right thing to do in terms of like doing quality research. So there is kind of like a tension there between paying attention to what's coming in, paying attention to your responses of what's coming in, whether it's interviews, surveys, rhetorical analysis, whatever, and making sure that you don't shut down too early and you close off your interpretations before you've actually collected all your data. That's a very real thing, and it's something to pay attention to. They talk about research reflections and things like that, so that might be a nice way to mitigate that a little bit. I've done that myself with interview projects, like writing a little bit after each session about what I learned and about how it might connect and how I need to kind of try to keep this data distant. It's a good thing, good process to use for your project. They mention on page 179 about when you're looking in your data, looking for commonalities and also looking for contradictions. And I think the contradictions are the really interesting part. I think it's interesting when you see people from different backgrounds commenting on a similar thing in a research study, whether it's, again, interview or observations or whatever. But it's also interesting to look for the contradictions. I was working with some undergraduates, and we're doing content analysis for that class, and she had this interview project where she was asking her participants, about their experiences with taking classes at a career technical center, and a participant contradicted herself. She talked about how the job was the most important thing, and then a little bit later she talked about something completely different, about like having some economic freedom would really it meant a lot to her and her family. So the student that I was working with was really kind of flummoxed by that. How do you make sense of that? I'm like, well, no, that's a really cool thing that you got. You get to explain that in your findings section. So looking for those contradictions and the areas of overlap and the being able to kind of piece things together. Like I've got quite a few people that are saying a similar thing. That's good stuff. That's fine as well. There's a tendency sometimes, like you go into your research and you have an idea of what it's going to say, and I think it's okay to to prognosticate a little bit. But there's a fine line between that and cherry picking data to support what it is you already think. And, in an undergraduate project, I think there's a little bit of that happens. And I think we kind of, we point it out, but we don't kind of belabor that too much. I work with students in the English capstone project here in our English department. And, there's students that they're really looking for this thing. So they're going to really look for that thing. And they might ignore some things that could be as equally interesting and call it to their attention. But in a master's thesis, you really do need to do your level best to make sure that you are going into analyzing your data with a little bit of with some objectivity, and not capital O objectivity where you're a robot or anything like that. But you're kind of checking your assumptions at the door. On 184, they mentioned that you read your data and you read it a lot, and that is so true. So if you're conducting interview research, if you're conducting survey research, and you've got transcripts, you read those transcripts several times. I'm talking 5 or 6 times all the way through before you start putting codes to things. And the coding thing is you're going to read more about that if you conduct if you work with me and you do something content analysis or interview based, I'm going to tell you that it's what is the move that is happening in this section of text that relates to your thesis, to your project's research question. And if you can come up with a short descriptor, that's the code that you use for that section. Dr. Jen Scott has a really helpful way of thinking about it and talking about it, and it's the difference between intensity and frequency. What are the things that are happening frequently? What things are repeating? And that could be conceptual things. I wouldn't think about it as this word's here and this word is also over here. That's a control F thing. That's a search that you could do, and some of that can be kind of helpful. And there's some online tools to help you, called concordance tools, that can help you do that. But what is really kind of interesting is what are the conceptual things, again, in light of your research question, that is happening here, and which ones are happening frequently, or which things are happening really intensely. Maybe it doesn't come up very often, but when it does, it really makes an impact. So coding is the process of assigning tags, if you will, labels to sections of text that have some kind of relevance or pertinence to your research question. That's a really important part of the process, and we all kind of teach it a little bit differently, and there's different kinds of traditions in all those different kinds of research that you might do when it comes to coding. So I can't really cover that completely. I'm going to switch screens here in just a second, and I'm going to show you some of the technological options when it comes to analyzing data and organizing your data. I'm going to do this pretty quickly because, again, it's going to be different for your project depending upon your research question, depending upon your thesis mentor, and depending upon the kind of data that you have. So bear with for a second, and I'm going to switch up my screens. One example I want to share with you is a survey project that I worked on in my capacity as our Director of Assessment and Accreditation. This was at the beginning of COVID. There were a lot of concerns about how our students were doing at the beginning of COVID, and there was a survey that was going around, and I saw it on a listserv that a lot of other institutions were asking, having their students complete, and I was like, hey, maybe similar data could be helpful for SSU. So there's some columns to the left that I'm going to hide from you that you can't see because they have some personal identifying information, but you see there's just a lot of data here. What issues and concerns have you had to switch to online-only classes? Each of these rows is an individual student, and I think we're up to 300 or something like that by the time we finish. Yeah, 293, so 292 with the header, with the first row. So, close to 300 responses. How do you go from this and making sense to it, and how do you go about analyzing it? Just a really quick summary of a project that I worked on with an undergraduate a few years ago. Let me show you what we did. We did this in Google Docs, so you can do this in a pretty low-tech kind of way. So hold on one second. Switch. So we have the different questions that we wanted to analyze. Like this is more qualitative stuff. It's, you know, there are some numerical things that you can do with survey responses, you know, Likert items and things like that. And there's even numbers that you can generate when you do an analysis of verbal text like what we have here. But we have each of the questions. So we've got all students' responses to question 9. What issues and or concerns have you had about the switch to online-only classes? And we went through it and we read it several times, and we've asked ourselves, where are we seeing something that's happening frequently, and where are we seeing things that are happening with some intensity? And so we developed different codes after reading it numerous times: accessibility to internet, class issues, accessibility to software programs, access to academic campuses and resources. And we started with a list that had, we were getting a little crazy with the different kinds of highlighting. And even now, like light blue 2 and cornflower blue, there's a lot that's going on here. But we had, gosh, I think this is 20 pages worth of text that we were going through. So there's a lot of different things that were happening. So question 9, all of the stuff we went through and we coded it, and we did that together. Then what we did is that we took everything that was highlighted blue and we put it together, and that's here. So we had everything where there was a conversation about internet problems. So the student was answering that question about concerns that they had about the switch or problems that they were having in their class, and they mentioned internet technology or internet service provider questions or issues. They all got placed here. That then became, once we analyzed that, or we got ourselves to this place, we asked ourselves, are there ways to kind of break this down? Are there ways to group some of these ideas around internet problems and to group those in a meaningful way so that people can make sense of it and act upon it? And yeah, we were able to do that. So we came up with this presentation, and let's see. Here's kind of the summary of what we're talking about. So the categories that we had for student comments, here are the different trends that we noticed by most frequently: internet and technology problems, and so on and so forth, and the number of comments about that issue. So you're able to take verbal data and to make it and turn it into something that is a little bit more numerical. And this will not work for everybody's project. This will not be everybody's cup of tea, but it was helpful for us to kind of make sense of that survey data and to use it. We shared our data with the Student Success Center and ITS, and they made a bunch of, they offered different resources and made some changes to their processes so that students have a little bit more access. So that's one quick way that you can take verbal data, analyze it, and use some technology to do that. Second option is to use Excel to do your coding. And what this is a capstone project that a student is working on in the English department. And it's, again, this might not be everybody's cup of tea. You might say, wait, I'm an English person. What is this Excel thing? What are you doing? And fair point. But what she was able to do is to take segments, and what she did is she's analyzing apologies. She wanted to take a look at how a YouTuber, kind of like Shane Dawson is the guy's name. If you know him, you know what I'm talking about. But he apologizes for things all the time because he says really dumb stuff all the time. So she's looking at an apology that he issued back in 2014 and another that he did in 2020, and she's trying to identify some trends and see, are there different ways that he's going about apologizing between these two videos. So she has segments here. So these are clips. And again, it's in the context of the research question. Is there something going on here? What's the segment of text that we're going to be thinking about? And she has codes, like brief descriptions of how she might summarize what is going on with that. And then short codes when we start to kind of collapse things together and start saying, hey, I think that there's ways that we can kind of group some of these things together. So being able to put this together in Excel allows you to come up with stuff like this, where you can say, in the row labels, I'm evaluating actions was the most prevalent code that we saw, and between the two videos, here's a breakdown in where those codes are at. One, I think I forgot to put the video on it, and then Video 1 has 19 comments about evaluating actions. The second video has 8. Is that significant? I don't know. It's going to be up to that student to kind of make the case for how they interpret these data. But this is one way that you can kind of use technology to help you analyze data and kind of identify some trends that you can talk about and interpret in your project. There are other options out there for you to use technology to analyze your data. Deduce is one that I use because it's relatively inexpensive. I think it's around $15 a month, and it only bills you in times that you use it. It's got a little bit of a learning curve to it, but it's something you can definitely figure out. That's really very helpful for interviews, survey data. I think the project that I did on the COVID survey results probably would have been a better fit for Deduce. It's known, it's a known quantity among folks that do qualitative research. So if you want to continue doing qualitative research at some point, it's something that that you would be able to use. It wouldn't be a one-off thing. So one other thing I kind of wanted to mention is that you can make this incredibly low-tech. You could put sections of a interview transcript, segments or paragraphs of an interview transcript, cut them out on a piece of paper and sort them that way. If that's part of the project that you're working on, if that might work for the project that you're working on. You do not need to use you don't have to get super proficient in Excel. You don't even have to do things in Microsoft Word. You can do things just by printing them out, cutting out a transcript, sorting it, and identifying this goes in this pile here that that I'm going to code with this thing or give it this kind of label, and then at the end you just have piles of little slips of paper that you're trying to make sense of to write your finding section. But the analysis is really in kind of seeing what are those trends, what are the comparisons that you can make between the two, between different groups. Depending upon the research that you're using, building in some kind of comparison group might be an important thing, particularly if you're doing a survey project or if you're doing an interview project. You want to understand somebody's that's had an experience with a particular phenomenon. You might get their reactions, and then people that might have had a different, maybe they experienced that phenomenon 10, 15, 20 years ago, interviewing them to get their experiences. Is there some kind of contrast that you can draw? Again, you all are working on very different projects, so these things are all kind of vague and might be hard to apply and hard to think about without knowing the specifics of your project. But these are things that you'll think about in the process of putting together a thesis project. That's what I wanted to share with you all. You stuck around to the end, and your mini assignment is to just write me an email, letting me know how you are. I know we're all very busy and time is short, but just check in with me. What's your vibe? Let's do a vibe check. Send me an email. Do it by the end of this upcoming week 12, and you get credit for this assignment, whatever that means. 1,000 bonus points. I don't know. Hope you all are doing well, and I hope to talk to you all soon. If you want to check in about your project, particularly those of you that are thinking about taking the thesis option, be a good time to chat with me in the next week or two. Bye for now.